Mr. Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2077 is a corporate disclosure bill. It would require corporation excise and income tax filers to also file a disclosure statement with the Secretary of State. The bill specifies that the policy applies to all publicly held traded corporations, all financial corporations and insurers, as well as any other corporations with an FTE of at least 25 employees or at least $10 million in Oregon sales. The bill requires that the first statement be filed for the state fiscal year 2015 by March 15, 2016, and then at the same time as the corporation's tax return thereafter. The bill identifies all of the information that would be required to be included in the form. It's largely tax return information, and it allows the Secretary of State to impose a penalty for corporations who fail to file that report.
Bravo. Thank you very much. Any members here who want to be heard? It's a big room, and I'm not seeing any. I'd like to call first Daniel Morris, Dave Rosenfeld, and Chuck Chekatov, please. Gentlemen.
Chair Barnhart, members of the committee. Again, I'm Dr. Daniel Morris. I'm here today to testify in support of House Bill 2077, which will give lawmakers access to information they need to craft smart tax policies. As a researcher who's passionate about good government, I spend a lot of time studying statistics from the Department of Revenue, in addition to state tax laws. And I think this information is really important because it can inform good policy, and it can help us understand just which businesses are, or taxpayers, are affected by potential tax changes. Since Oregon has the lowest business taxes in the country, I think it's natural to want to focus on business taxes to find ways to raise revenues, whether that's by increasing tax rates, eliminating tax breaks, or otherwise tightening up the tax code. I think there's a general sense out there that big corporations are not paying their fair share of taxes. And along with that, I think there's strong public support for raising taxes on corporations. But of course, it's not just about raising revenue. I think we all want policies that are right for Oregon's economy, and that we can feel more confident in those policies when we know that they're based on good data. While publicly traded companies are required to disclose information on sales, profits, and taxes, and executive compensation, these data are only provided at the national level, and they're not broken out by state. So unfortunately, right now, the information that's available is actually pretty limited because companies aren't required to disclose this state-level statistics. The aggregate statistics do give us a good sense of the big picture, but they just aren't available in enough detail to tell us the effects of particular tax changes on certain businesses for the most part. So I just wanted to briefly give the committee a few examples of some of the things that I've run across in the course of my research that I'd like to know more about, that House Bill 2077 would enable more information to shed some light on this. So first, in tax year 2012, which is the most recent year that statistics are available, there were 393 corporations that paid $0 in income taxes because they were able to use tax credits against their minimum tax. These tax credits can be expensive, and I know we all want to make sure we're getting our money's worth out of them. But if we don't have good data on which companies are earning, selling, or using tax credits, it's a lot harder to make that determination about whether those credits are achieving their intended outcomes. So a tax disclosure law would enable us to know more about that. Again, that same year, 20 corporations that each reported more than $10 million in taxable income were still eligible to pay Oregon's minimum tax. And though these 20 companies collectively reported $783 million in income taxable in Oregon, collectively they only paid $100,000 in taxes. So I can't tell you whether they each paid $5,000 or if one paid $100,000 and 19 paid zero. But it's certainly something that I was curious to learn more about, and it seems like it would be informative for tax policy discussions. And then finally, as I mentioned a minute ago, Bloomberg News reports that companies, major U.S. corporations, have stashed over $2 trillion in offshore subsidiaries. Though the profits held in certain tax havens are now counted towards Oregon's taxes, we really don't know what other countries these companies are using as tax havens. And having access to that information would help inform discussions in front of this committee around adding additional countries to the tax haven list. So again, I can only imagine how many times members of this committee have sort of run into these challenges with not having enough information about corporate taxes. And I know that since the policies that come out of this committee can have such a profound impact on Oregon's economy, I really just I believe that greater transparency into these issues can make us all feel more confident about the effects of our revenue policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen?
Chair Barnhart, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Dave Rosenfeld, OSPRG's Executive Director. Thank you for considering this matter. OSPRG supports several provisions in House Bill 2077, the details of which are in our written testimony. I won't itemize them here. The reason why we support those provisions is we think those could be an important tool for you all in addressing the issue of tax avoidance through offshore tax havens, which is a big problem. It's estimated that about 70% of the Fortune 500 companies use offshore tax havens to reduce their tax liability by stashing profits offshore. About 8,000 subsidiaries, what we've counted thus far since 2013. Oregon, we estimate, loses about $200 million annually in revenue in state revenue as a result of this practice. And when some set of corporations use offshore tax havens to avoid paying their state taxes, the rest of us pick up the tab in terms of higher taxes for the rest of us, cuts in public services. And small businesses are one set of people that are impacted by this. We estimate that if you took all the lost revenue, corporate revenue, as a result of this kind of tax dodging and then reapportioned it and forced all the small businesses in the state to have to then pay to pick up the tab, that'd be somewhere between $600 and $700 in additional taxes every year that each small business in the state would have to pay. Beyond that, there's an anti-competitive thing. When some set of businesses are able to, just by virtue of the fact that they have the resources to have tax attorneys and tax lawyers and that kind of thing, cook up schemes to be able to reduce their liability, then it creates an unlevel playing field. And so as a result, you have two different kinds of tax systems. One for those who can afford those kinds of resources, really big guys, and then those who can't. And there's winners and losers to that. And the winners are multinational pharmaceutical companies and tech companies. The losers are small businesses and retailers and taxpayers who can't afford those kinds of resources. And so that's not really a very good way to organize our tax system. Anyway, so there's lots of ways we can go about trying to solve that problem. The legislature in 2013, you'll recall, took one very, very good step. Our testimony itemizes what that is. For those of you who were around at that point, it was unanimous. So thank you for passing that. That was a good first step towards cracking down on offshore tax havens. Another step that you can take is to increase transparency. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. The bill has a number of ways which you can go about that. The principle would be that it would require corporations at some level to disclose their tax liability and then itemize at some level what are the credits and deductions that got them to that point. And the main reason why you'd want to do that is just to have some facts in front of you when you make decisions regarding corporate taxation. To just know that would be valuable, and then to know how the laws that you and your predecessors have established and your colleagues in Congress have established, how they interact with each other to what the outcome is valuable, so that you can then make just more of an informed decision about what the corporate tax rate ought to be. And we would maintain that there's a wide variety of opinion in this building about what the level of corporate taxes ought to be. And regardless of where you come from on that, you'd probably want to know just what actually are people paying, because we do know that many don't pay what the legal statutory rate is. And so just knowing that allows us to make a better choice. So one argument against doing this kind of thing is that it could be anti-competitive, meaning it could require companies to disclose proprietary information. I think we would just say, please keep in mind that not all information is proprietary. Not all information is the same. And one question that you could ask is just going, where is the line, and what are the things that we can do that are well before the line? And then we could debate and quibble about all the other things. And so the portions of the bill that we support that, again, are itemized in the written testimony are things that, in our estimation, are well before the line, and where the public's interest and your interest in being able to make good decisions would outweigh whatever argument could be made about that being proprietary. And so we would urge you to, at least as a starting point, consider adopting those, and then you could obviously move forward in future years in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Chuck Sheketoff, the Oregon Center for Public Policy, here in support of House Bill 2077. You know that in the early 80s, Citizens for Tax Justice at the national level did a report showing the variation in taxes paid and sometimes not paid by large corporations. And it's been credited with leading to the 1986 Tax Reform Act that Bob Packwood shepherded through Congress that closed a lot of corporate loopholes and changed our corporate tax system. I always get confused about, can't remember which was which, but in that report, Westinghouse and GE, which to members of Congress and most Americans, I think, seem like pretty similar companies. They make engines, they make appliances, they're electronics companies. One was paying a lot in taxes and one was paying very little. And that's just one example of why Congress did some stuff to change and make our tax system more fair back in '86. The information is available, lots of detailed information is available for those publicly traded companies with their SEC filings. And it's a concern about proprietary, I think, is rather bogus, given that it's sort of yesterday's news, tomorrow's when you're getting it. And it's much more detailed at the SEC level than this bill would require at the state level. I do have a few suggestions for changes in the bill. The most key one is, I think, on line 13 on page 1, it should be 250. I think that may be a Scribner's error, or more full-time equivalents of the non-publicly traded
Instead
companies.
of 25.
Instead of 25,
Thank
right.
you.
Daniel mentioned the data on companies using credits to get to zero. We've actually just received, and we're going to be publishing a short paper shortly, more detailed data on who those 393 companies are that got to pay absolutely nothing because of being able to use credits against the minimum tax. At least 49 of them have Oregon income of over $1 million. At least 49 have income of over $1 million. And over half of them have sales of over $1 million in Oregon. There's questions, people have raised questions about whether this is bad for the business climate in Oregon. You know, Oregon's Business Oregon office quotes the same study that we all quote and cite, and that your legislative revenue office said is probably the best survey of tax burdens on business, which is the Council on State Taxation report that comes out every year. And we've always been fairly low, really low. The most recent one, we were the lowest in business taxes on state and local taxes on businesses, not on corporations per se. And they cite that we have low taxes, but they also note on their webpage that's probably not the decision that what gets people to come here. It's our workforce, it's our quality of life, it's our public structures that support the business environment. So I don't believe taxes are part of the business climate, but I don't think this would harm that. I mean, I think when Oregon is recruiting a business to come here, they'd be able to show you're going to pay low taxes. Look at a similar manufacturer. Look what they're paying. They're paying low taxes. You'd also see which companies are paying their fair share in taxes. So I just don't see it as an issue of hurting the business climate. Concerns in the past when this bill has come up is, it'll be confusing for people, and people will misunderstand the information. Well, there's a provision in the bill that allows businesses, when they file the form, the Secretary of State has to give them space to explain the information on their form to help allay those concerns. It's not going to hurt or even touch small businesses. I don't think a small business, if you raise it to 250 employees or more than 10 million, I think that exempts small businesses. $10 million is over $800,000 a month, or close to $200,000 in Oregon sales each week. That's not the coffee shop or shoe store that I go to. So I just think it doesn't affect small businesses, but it does need to impact large, non-publicly traded businesses. We have some very large ones in the state. The largest wood products manufacturer in the country, if not the world, JELD-WEN, is not publicly traded and is located here in Oregon, or part of them is located here in Oregon. So we need to have the information. You know, when they were a big taxpayer, Intel Corporation used to publicize how much they paid in taxes. If you go back to the Oregonian in the late 90s, you'll see that they paid $50 million or more in taxes each year, and they published studies boasting about their corporate income taxes. They were successful at changing the corporate income tax code, so now they're probably paying our minimum tax or less. And so you don't see that in the studies, the boilerplate studies that Echo Northwest produces for them. But they would boast about their taxes. It's not a bad thing to know the taxes that are being paid, and it'll help you make the right decisions. You know, if you're talking with the governor said, I want my head of the Department of Revenue in on a meeting with legislative leaders to negotiate a corporate tax bill, and one business is sitting there saying, well, we're already paying too much, and the Department of Revenue knows they're not paying anything, I think you ought to know that too. And I think the public ought to know that, whether or not, and have a fair negotiations about it. And if you see inconsistencies, so for instance, I live here in the Valley and shop at Roth's independent grocer. If independent grocers like Roth's are paying more in taxes than Albertson Safeway, which is now one entity, we should know that and try to figure out how does a large company like Albertson Safeway get away with paying less in taxes than the Roth's chain. And only through disclosure can you learn that. So I think it's good for business, and it's good for Oregon, and it's good for better policy on taxes, and I urge you to support the bill.
Thank you very much. Questions for this panel? Representative Whitsitt, please.
I'm not a lawyer, just a geologist. So I just have a question. If Oregon enticed corporate investment through tax credits, come to our state, build something, are those tax credits in that agreement considered a contract? Because it's my understanding under constitutional law that we don't have the ability to unilaterally change a contract unless we refer it to the people or the legislature overturn the Constitution. And I was just wondering, what's your opinion of the agreement that the state of Oregon has made?
That's really a legislative council question.
Okay,
But I think Chris has a little insight on it that he might share.
It really is a legislative council question, and there's some nuances to it.
What he said a minute ago was that it's an open question.
Yeah, there's an open question, and it depends. You get into issues of whether or not a tax credit has been sold or transferred, and so you have an entity that maybe earns the credit, and then somebody else who's claiming the credit. So there's some complexities like that.
So how do we, as a legislative body, act on a law when we don't have the answer to that question?
Well, during the time I've been on the committee, we've made a lot of tax changes. We've put sunsets on credits. We've done a whole bunch of things that we even passed one bill that had a retroactive effect by the time it was finally approved by the people. Actually, two bills, Measure 66 and 67, that went back a year before the time of the election. I don't think anybody challenged it legally on the grounds that we couldn't do it. I think we can do it. My understanding, at least, is that the issues that come up in this area have to do with when somebody has signed a contract with a third party. The one that Chris referred to is when I have a tax credit that I can't use and I sell it to somebody else and they pay me for it. That one we may be stuck with paying regardless, unless we've got some other rules already in place under the contract provision you're thinking about. But otherwise, I would argue, subject of course to legislative council saying otherwise, that we can make lots of changes in tax law, even retroactively, as a legislature, if that seems to be good public policy to us. Did you have a different question that the panel might actually talk to?
Well,
Chuck, do you want to talk on that
Mr.
one?
Chairman,
Yeah.
Representative Whitsitt, I guess I'm not really sure how I understand the question, I think. I don't know the answer. And I'm no longer a lawyer, so I get to plead that as well. But, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with the bill, because the bill doesn't change any tax law. The bill is a disclosure bill. Bill doesn't change any tax law. I will tell you, I'll be fully honest with you, I call this the climate change that we want bill. The climate change to create the climate, when we get the information, to address the problems in our tax code. But it does not change any tax credit or anything. It just has disclosure of what companies are getting. It has a disclosure of the carry forwards. Right now, if you ask the Department of Revenue, how many carry forwards are on the books of Oregon corporations, they don't know. They don't have a schedule on a corporate tax return where they have to list all the carry forwards they're saving for future years. this would help us get closer to that, because the companies that have to file this will have to give a schedule carry forward.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I'm going to move forward.
I just have one quick
A
question
short
before I
one?
do-
Yes,
yeah.
Representative
So,
Smith-Warner.
also partially, I apologize, Chair, because I have another obligation in a few minutes. I just wanted to go in on that concept that what I find interesting about this is indeed, we do want, as legislators, I think there is a huge public policy implication in our being able to assess the efficacy of our laws, in this case, in our tax laws, when we can indeed see, I've spoken with people in organizations who say, well, this will help this certain kind of business, increase or expand or whatever, and it'll be really targeted to small and medium family-owned businesses or whatever it is. And I think we have a very difficult time in assessing how well our tax policy is working when we cannot see, okay, we're going to pass this, and then and see indeed are the kind of companies we hoped to incent taking advantage of that, or are they not? Is it having unintended consequences? And I just think that the policy implications of indeed increased transparency for us, of being able to see the impact of what our tax policy is doing, I think that's a really significant advantage to this or some kind of transparency bill.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
for this panel. I have a lot of people to testify. We have about 18 minutes. I'm going to call panels and ask them to talk only about things that haven't already been talked about. And I'm going to call a panel of those who've indicated that they're opposed to the measure first, because we've heard from a panel that was in favor. And then I'm going to ask who in the group is very unlikely to be able to come back another time because of other commitments. Brad Morrison, Tracy Hensley, Kay Bridges, please. I apologize for trying to rush you along, but I'm trying to get as many people in as I can today.
That's quite all right.
Thank you.
Chairman, members of the board, my name is Brad Morrison, and I'm here to oppose HB 2077. I've had little time to really fully review this bill, but a few things that I did notice jumped out at me that gave me some concern. One of them is I'm concerned for the potential violation of privacy as protected by law for some individuals listed in this bill. And I'd like some clarification somewhere down the line on the term affiliates as used in Section 2, subsection B. It seems a rather broad term. The requirements in this bill in general strike me as a cumbersome burden to impose on an already beleaguered business environment. The extra cost that may be incurred to comply with the proposed requirements seems to me that they'd have enough impact to possibly close the doors of many smaller businesses which tend to cater to larger businesses, something that our volatile economy could ill afford. A number of the requirements enumerated under Section 3, particularly subsection J, tax credits claimed each credit individually enumerated. That strikes me as an independent business owner myself. This could basically amount to kind of like an annual audit almost. This bill strikes me as extremely intrusive and so complex and ambiguous in nature as to amount to a penal mechanism designed to generate revenue via fees, fines, and penalties, and I urge a no vote on this thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I had some of the same concerns as Mr. Morrison.
And would you state your name
likewise-
for the record,
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry, Tracy Hensley.
Thank you, Tracy.
And, but more specific, I have more questions than answers on this myself. But I think my biggest concern I come with today is that the testimony supporting this bill seems to be directed towards larger corporations that would employ thousands of people, Nike, Apple, Microsoft, these types of companies. And in my hometown, 18 of our 20 biggest employees or employers employ more than 25 folks. So this could potentially affect them. And my
Do
concern...
they employ more than 250?
No, it says 25.
It does here in this bill, you're right.
Yes.
But one of the comments we got from one of the proponents of the bill was that he thought it was a Scrivener's error and it should have been 250.
Well, I would like that clarified, because this
Right.
was kind of alarming when I saw that,
Right.
and it was 18 of our 20 biggest employers are 25 or more people.
Right.
And there's only one major retailer, Fred Meyer, in that bunch, where most of them are, produce and distribute locally made products. And these are, one family grocer and then manufacturers. And so this would have a potential of having them either cut some jobs to get under that threshold, or maybe even leave the state. And I would like us to do something more to create a more business-friendly environment rather than scaring them away. And if there's concerning loopholes that we're trying to address, maybe we should address those rather than creating an entire new law that would affect so many more people.
Thank you very
I
much.
urge I know vote.
Appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Kay Bridges, and I am opposed to what I see in this bill. I had a business that started in the 80s. I heard reference to the 80s earlier, and all of the business reforms that happened about that time, and I felt like a victim of those supposed reforms, mostly because my business grew as a single owner floral business. We had other things as well, to almost a 300,000 gross business in the 80s, unheard of. So the state of Oregon said one of my time payments, because I was growing by 80%. If you have any idea what 80% can do to a business, it can break a business pretty darn fast. You are using yesterday's money to buy tomorrow's increased product,
Yeah.
and you have no money today, and you live on nothing as an owner.
Yeah.
How do you know these businesses aren't suffering through the same thing? It makes me angry. I just tweeted and said, please, Lord, help me not scream the next time I hear, make them pay their fair share. When I realize what these businesses go through, guess who the other businesses were right next door to me at that time? Nike, Mentor Graphics, Adidas, Avia, Enterprise. They started in a downtime, and they learned how to suffer through those downtimes. And they learned how to make a profit. And how do you get a profit, by the way, that I saw mentioned earlier in the work session, if you don't have jobs where the people get to earn money to pay the taxes? So if there aren't the jobs and they can't pay taxes, then maybe you have a valid point. But if they have more jobs and they pay more taxes, maybe the businesses don't have any money, like I didn't have any money in 1980s when my business was growing by 80%. And because my payment arrived in Salem one day late, they did a full audit on me. 5.5 days in my flower shop while I'm at the Oregon tent down at the Rose Festival, pulling more information every single day. I mailed it on Monday. It was due on Friday, and they say it didn't arrive until the next Monday. Baloney. I even came down here and asked for documentation from that audit after my dad died and my husband's hospital bouts. And they said, oh, it's too late. We don't have those records now. Well, everybody tells me maybe they owed me money. So how do we know the large corporations don't suffer through the same things I did as a 300,000 gross business? And why, if it's 25, hopefully it's the Scrivener's error, 25 people full-time at Valentine's delivering over 400 deliveries in 2 days. And the rest of the time I had 3 full-time people. So what criteria does this bill give us? I appreciate Chair Barnhart and committee. I did not address you at the beginning of this. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for yours. We appreciate it very much, and thank you for coming and sitting through the rest of the meeting today. I want to ask now, I have 2+ pages of people who want to talk. We have 10 more minutes today. If people want to come back, we'll hold another hearing at a time that I can't tell you right now because I don't know. Of those who signed up, is there anybody here who cannot come back later? Please, you're next. Who else? Yes, yes, sir. Mr. Calhoun, come forward, please. Who else? All right, gentlemen, please go ahead. John?
Chair Bernhardt, Vice Chair Peterson, Vice Chair Pence, and members of the committee. My name is John Calhoun. I'm a resident of Portland. I'm here today on behalf of the Oregon Center for Christian Voices. OCCV is a faith-based nonprofit seeking to activate Christians on issues of economic and social justice. We believe Scripture is clear that God's intended role for government is to assure that poor and marginalized people are cared for and that all individuals have the opportunity to flourish. We believe a budget is a moral document and that our state budget reflects who and what is important and who and what is not. We support HB 2940 and HB 27 so that the legislature will have the tools to properly weigh tax incentives for large corporations against the needs for education, broad-based infrastructure investments, and care for the indigent or disadvantaged in our society. Typically, tax breaks are provided with good intentions at the time that are granted to incentivize specific economic activity. Sometimes those tax breaks continue long after the time that they can be justified, and sometimes the promises made at the time are simply not met. Sometimes corporations find ways to avoid paying any taxes in ways not intended by this legislature. Tax expenditures need to be fully weighed by the legislature against other pressing needs. Oregon is above the national average in child hunger, and nearly half the people assisted by food stamps are 18 or younger. Right now, Oregon cannot fund a full school year and reasonable class sizes for our students. Rising college tuition is preventing some of our citizens from attending university and reaching their full potential. Law enforcement in some parts of the state is practically non-existent. Families with children too often live in cars or other unsafe conditions because they can't afford an apartment. Law enforcement, HB 2940 and HB 2077 will not solve our budgetary problems. However, they are a necessary step to ensure that the legislature and the public understand what the trade-offs are. During a period of great and growing income and wealth disparity, we need to bring light to the debate over who is benefiting from advantageous tax breaks and who is being hurt. As an Oregonian member of the faith community who cares about protecting vulnerable kids, families, and seniors, I encourage you to support these bills. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnhart, Vice Chair Bentz, and other members. My name is David Roth. I'm a volunteer with Tax Fairness Oregon. I had to go plug the meter, so I wasn't here to hear what the previous proponents were saying, so I might be a bit redundant, but I will try to be brief. If a strong version of this bill were passed in this session, the work of this committee would be so much easier and more fruitful. So would the work of TFO, of the press, and all the citizens who wish to understand and influence our tax structure. As our Oregon has pointed out, businesses are already routinely disclosing this kind of information from their federal income tax. We still have battles over the interpretation and enforcement of our public records laws, but those laws have been in place for decades. Corporations are public entities too. They would not exist except for the articles of incorporation required by the laws of Oregon. This bill simply affirms the obvious, that it is in the interest of the public to require public disclosure from any public entity, including corporations. The health industry is a good example of the trend towards public disclosure of information that businesses would prefer to keep private. I'm referring to the requirements that hospitals and physicians disclose their success rates in surgery, including, nowadays, readmittance rates. Under Obamacare, fortunately, insurance companies and hospitals are now required to publicize their fee structures so that Americans can finally be informed consumers. I see this as a perfectly suitable precedent that is in the healthcare field for what is being proposed here concerning corporate taxation, that it is in the interest of the public to learn more about the activities, in particular tax activities in this state. Let me summarize by saying this. These health industry reforms took decades. Oregon's political leaders and healthcare leaders led the way. We have a lot to be proud of in that regard. Let's apply the same foresight and grit to public disclosure of corporate taxes. It's the future.
Thank you very much. Questions for this panel? Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your testimony. I'm going to try to call the next panel and see if we can get you in. Russ, with a last name beginning with a D, and I can't. Oh, thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, and Josie, is it Cuny?
We can just speak for one.
Yeah.
Actually, you want to do that?
The other bill.
I'm sorry.
You
Am I on the other?
Summarize for all of us, or should I?
No. I'm going to be very brief in my comments.
Well, you signed up on 2077.
Yes.
And that's the bill that we're talking about
Right.
today.
We're going to come back when the other bill is up again.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because that's really our major focus. But we felt that again, my name's Russ Dondero. I live in Forest Grove, and I'm a member of 3 different coalitions. The one involved with the Tax Fairness Oregon, WCCAN, and Interfaith Community on Homelessness. And so the 3 of us have been working together with other people to craft a bill that would get at these issues of transparency. So we like what House Bill 277 does because it begins to unwind the issue of transparency in a way that is understandable to everyone. And I think that's an important policy objective so that when policy on taxation is discussed in this body as well as elsewhere, we know what we're talking about. Data is necessary to make quality decisions. The other comment I want to make is that many of the corporations that have been implied in this conversation happen to be recipients of a variety of Oregon programs, including the Strategic Investment Program and many other tax credits and grants programs. So that, in effect, we as taxpayers have become part of the stakeholder group that helps corporations like Intel, Nike, et cetera, manage a complex global economy successfully. So as in effect, as de facto stakeholders, I think we have a right to know what our money is going for and producing. So the transparency issue is above and beyond everything else that I've heard, particularly the first set of panels.
Thank you.
That's why I support this bill, and I think we do.
Thank you.
My name is Garrett Rosenthal. I live in Tualatin. I'm representing right now Tax Recovery on Investment Coalition, and our primary concerns on a number of bills, and there's a number of bills dealing with transparency and with tax issues before the legislature this session, have to do with transparency, accountability, and particularly the wisdom of how Oregon invests our money, which is our tax money that goes into them. And that includes not only how money is spent on expenditures, but also how money is gotten and how it's gotten fairly from those that owe money. So we have reviewed this as part of our review of other measures, and we support it because it is a step in the right direction in that regard. So that's all I need to say on this.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
I can forgo my commentary, but I just feel that the disclosure of corporate taxes is a huge factor.
State your name for the record,
Oh, excuse me. Josephine Kerner, Chair Barnhart, members of the committee. A huge portion of, we have property taxes going back, corporate taxes forgiveness that amounts to a great deal of money, and we need to know how much that is and see that together with a lot of other information. So we'll talk to that in another bill, another time.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming today, and I appreciate it. Colleagues, we are going to, I'm going to close the public hearing on House Bill 2077. We are going to repost this bill for additional public hearing and House Bill 2940, which we didn't get to today. We're going to set over till tomorrow the work session on House Bill 2489. Paul, have I done all the announcements I need to give? Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for coming, and I apologize we didn't get to you all today. With that, the committee is adjourned.